I haven't worn makeup in since school was out. That's not going to change. Good morning. I just got done looking at all my emails. This is specifically for AP kids, so if you're not an AP, bye. It doesn't really apply to you. It won't be helpful unless you just want to see my face. So some people in AP, first of all, thanks to those that are submitting essays and asking for feedback and asking questions. It's good. It helps guide me on what help I can provide. So this video is to provide that help because I've had a couple of people who are actually very, very strong writers kind of freaking out a little bit about writing rhetorical analysis. And I think part of it is you guys are overcomplicating what it is or trying to do too much. So today's video is to keep it simple. Remember the old acronym KISS, and it's keep it simple, stupid. You guys aren't stupid, so it's just, keep it simple. So here's what I'm noticing. A lot of you are trying to get as many rhetorical devices or strategies into your rhetorical analysis as possible. And I haven't looked at the Gandhi ones yet. I'm just talking about some people have submitted other essays or just asked me questions about it. So that's what I'm addressing today is what should you do if you're still having issues with, you read a piece and you're having a hard time identifying the strategies or devices or knowing even which ones to write about? The first thing I would say is what stood out to you first? Because if it stood out to you, most likely it would stand out to their intended audience as well. If you can't even say that anything stands out, you're just like, oh, well, it's written and they used words and they wrote sentences, then we need to go back and dig deeper. So here are my tips for things that I think if you have these ones in your tool belt, that you could actually know how to look for them in a piece, then you can probably handle anything they throw at you. Because it's probably there's just so much you can notice about structure. I mean, rhetorical analysis is just analyzing how we write. That's it. That's what rhetoric is. Rhetoric is communication and writing. That's it. We often confuse it with political rhetoric, which is often looking at the hidden agendas in politicians' messages and speeches and writings and stuff. No, don't overcomplicate it. Rhetoric is just writing. Okay. So here are the big ones. The first one I will start off with that I've mentioned before is diction. For some reason, this one's always made sense to me since high school. I remember, I don't know why, it just clicked for me. I could understand that, maybe it's because I've studied poetry a lot and I had teachers that had me study poetry. And with poetry, there's so much importance with what words you pick, not just for the sound, but for the meaning. So I really understood that analyzing individual words was important and that people pick certain words, not phrases, not sentences, words. A single word is important. If you can't wrap your head around that, then don't do diction. I mean, some people are still quoting sentences or entire phrases. That's fine to start off with, but you better pull out those individual words that they used and what was the purpose behind that. Why did they use those? And if you kind of have a pattern brain like I do, most humans notice patterns anyway. So I'm not saying some of us have this gift and some of us don't. Some of us are just really hyper aware of patterns. And I'm one of those people. So that might be why diction really works for me, because I can start to notice a trend in word choices that they have something in common. And so remember that strategy I taught you guys where it was to mark strong adjectives and verbs with a plus or a minus for positive connotation, negative connotation. If someone's writing about something really controversial and you can kind of get that feeling about it, or if they're criticizing somebody, do that plus minus technique. And that will help you figure out the strong diction and see that trend. I kind of do that stuff mentally when I read. It's something I pick up on. And I think it just comes from practice. It comes from just reading a lot and looking for those things and just saying, wow, that's really cool that I noticed they use these certain words. Um, as far as word choice goes, you can also talk about jargon. Jargon are those technical terms for a certain industry or business or profession or whatever area of study. Um, so all these terms we learn in APLAC and Comp, those are our jargon for English. So when we talk about diction or juxtaposition or anaphora, that's our jargon. Um, every discipline or profession tends to have one. So that's like an offshoot of diction. If you're going to write about diction, you can't just say the author uses diction. You're going to sound like an idiot. And a lot of AP teachers that I keep in contact with online have the same issue with kids trying to say the author uses diction. Yeah, we all use diction. It's called words. So don't say that. And you're like, well, then what do I say? Well, you need to remember how we did that activity where we put a descriptive word in front of the diction, the word diction, and we said it's this type of diction. So critical diction, that's much better because that's actually saying something. If you just say an author uses diction, well, we all do. That's just writing. We use words. Durr. So don't do, I mean, just get that around your head. Because really what the word diction means, it's a fancy name for word choices, the words you choose. And every author chooses words. When you guys write your essays, you choose words. And I hope you're intentional with that. You should be if at this point in your life. So diction. Diction will affect the tone. So it pairs really well with tone. Tone, however, is not a device or strategy. It's the result. Same thing with the appeals. Remember the cat part of Space Cat? The C leads to the A and the T. Got that? Now, most of you probably pick up on the A and the T, the appeals, so ethos, pathos, logos, or the tone of the piece. Because that has to deal with like how we feel when we read something, or we can get a sense of it. You're getting that because of the choices that were made, the C part of the cat. So in rhetorical analysis, you just got to put all those pieces together and figure out why that is. Why do I think they're appealing to emotions here? What did they do in their writing that really made me feel empathy or made me feel upset? Or would want their audience to feel that way? Because remember, we got to separate us from their intended audience, but still, that's a starting point. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. We've got diction is a big one that I would use if it makes sense to you. If you can understand, okay, I can look at individual words, I can see the word choice that's going on there. And I can talk about patterns when they use certain words to talk about certain things. That is what's really powerful with diction, is when you can notice that trend. I'm sorry the fan's doing this weird halo thing above my head. Oh well. My husband's on a conference call right now, which is why I'm in my room talking. I've already been out of bed and been up since like 7. Anyway, I had to come in here where it was quiet. All right, so if you're going to do diction, look for patterns, look for trends, or even just a few that stand out that really you think would hit that audience, that pack a punch. Okay. That's what you would want to point out. And you want to point out why you think they used that. Okay. And it shouldn't just because it sounded nice. Who cares? I mean, a lot of speeches are going to have those sound devices, like Martin Luther King Jr. when we read his stuff. I mean, he's an expert at those sound devices. So in speeches, you're going to see that a lot more. So here's a clue. If on the exam you get a speech, there's probably going to be a lot of repetition, parallel structure, alliteration, assonance, possibly. I mean, there's going to be a lot of sound devices. Diction is also going to be pivotal. So that's why I'm going over these, because a lot of time they're speeches. But that's going to apply to essays too, or letters. It's just not going to be as obvious. I think those ones are more obvious in speeches. So it just depends what they throw at you. All right. So diction I talked about. And I've said it like 5 times. Okay, so the next one that, and I've already mentioned some of these. These are like my big 5 or 6. I don't know how many I'll actually number. I didn't really plan this out too much. I emailed one of you earlier and kind of went over this. So I thought I would just record it for the whole class. Okay, so the next one I would look at is repetition. I mean, we repeat ideas, we repeat phrasings. Remember the anaphoras, or beginnings of sentences? That's a type of repetition. If you can't remember an aphra, that's fine. Call it repetition of blah, blah, blah. I had one student that wrote an essay that noticed the repetition at the end of paragraphs of a certain word, that 5 paragraphs in a row ended with this word. Oh my gosh, you're combining repetition and diction. That's awesome. Do that. You know, if you notice something like that, just call it out and just say why that's so effective. Oh, it's toward the end of the speech, which you're trying at the end of the speech to really hammer home your point. And it's also adding to that tone because it's repeating this idea, and the person keeps using the same word just in different forms over and over and over again. So repetition can be lots of things. It can be that where it's repeated the same word. It could be a repeated idea. It can be more like parallel structure, where how the sentences are written is a repeated pattern. I would say most of you are not as great at parallel structure. You kind of have to understand parts of speech and phrases to do that. So some of you are good with it, some of you not so much. So please make sure you're certain it's parallel structure if you're going to call it that. If not, guess what I would call it? Repetition. Because repetition is much more of a broad category. And if you're not sure, you're probably going to be in the right boat if you call it repetition when you're thinking it's parallel structure and you're not sure. If you're sure, go for it. But that's another suggestion I would give, especially if you're nervous about it. That repetition is that broad category. You just need to explain it. What is being repeated? And then why is that effective with what they're trying to do and who their audience is, versus something else. By the way, I hope that you watched the Gandhi video of Mr. Weeks and I. He and I both, we didn't set that up ahead of time as far as like who was going to say what. We legitimately just decided on a prompt together and then got together on Zoom and started talking about it and reading it. And we hadn't really talked about it a whole lot. So you got to see how each of us interpreted it a little bit differently, and we're able to pick up on different things. What I would do with that in an essay, I don't know. But that was up to you, because that's why I said for you to write it, because it was like, okay, we've done the picking apart. How do we notice this stuff? Now you go write something. However, some of you are stuck in this spot that I'm talking about right now, which is how do I notice that stuff, or how do I find it? Like I can read something and understand what their point is, but I have a hard time finding the devices and the choices. So that's why I have these suggestions. So, okay, so we've got diction, we've got repetition. That's pretty good. I mean, that's 2. I would say if you have at least 2, I mean, you really want to shoot for 3. I know it sounds like the 3-prong thesis, but it works. I've put in a resource from one of my favorite AP teachers that I chat with on Facebook. He has a website and a YouTube channel, Garden of English. He has a quick sheet is what he called it. I think it's a cheat sheet, because we know that this exam is going to be open notes. So it has like examples of thesis statements. It has a formula he uses, which is really similar to the one I taught you guys early on this year, and that you shove on your note cards. So go to that resource. It's in Canvas. I put it there. He also has examples for like body paragraphs and different sentence starters, which I thought was really cool. So if you're taking the exam, go download that, have it ready, maybe even print it off so you have it right there if you have a printer. Because I don't know with the security of this exam if they're going to lock down. They said they took down the locking browser thingy, but I would download that and look at it. I seriously do it. I'm not going to create a cheat sheet because he already has that one that's, I think, pretty solid. It also has that list of verbs that I gave you. I got it from him because he's awesome. He puts this stuff together, and I'm like, that would have taken me a couple hours to do that. So heck yes, I'm going to use your stuff. So download that. It's in Canvas. It gives you some ideas for thesis, body, and conclusions. He has pretty much the basics of an essay, some tips in there. I also, he has a video about rhetorical analysis annotations that I shared with a couple students. So I'll double check and make sure those are in Canvas too, links to those ones. I thought I put them in there, but maybe not. All right, what else? Okay, diction. Repetition. What was the other one I was going to bring up? Figurative language. Figurative language is another huge category. So some of you are doing like things saying like, oh, they use vivid description. What does that even mean? What makes it vivid? I think figurative language is much better than vivid description. Vivid description is just like, yeah, anyone describing something in detail. Yeah, that's kind of what we do when we write. So to me, that's not as strong of a choice. Unless you can point to like what it is about that description that is so compelling or interesting, convincing. You would just need to do that. So I would go more with figurative language for that. Don't worry if you don't remember, like if you're like, man, is this an extended metaphor or is this an analogy? It's figurative language. Explain the figurative language. I'm going to go back to one I was reading just before this video, which was someone wrote about the Madeleine Albright speech to the women at Mount Holyoke College from 2018. And in that, she references the glass ceiling versus the dirt floor. So women bumping against the glass ceiling or standing from the dirt floor. And her point is if you don't know the glass ceiling metaphor, glass, it's transparent. You can't see it, right? It can be broken, but it's still a barrier, right? And if there's like a glass thing there, you may not see it at all, or you may barely see the reflection or something. And it has to do with power in our country and in our world and who has it, and that women are kept where they're at because of this glass ceiling, that there's only a certain level you can rise to as a woman. And that up here above that glass ceiling is where certain men in power are at. And that's the concept. That's the figurative language. We know it's not a literal glass ceiling that we're breaking through or bumping up against. Okay. And I can explain that. But then she has the dirt floor, which is the other side, which I love this juxtaposition she does there. So notice how I blended in another choice there of the juxtaposition. I don't have to mention that, but because I noticed it, I would mention that she's taking two extremes, those bumping against the glass ceiling at the top and those who can barely make it off of the dirt floor. The dirt floor is dirty and horrible and represents poverty and oppression, all those things. It's not necessarily literal, but those women also need to rise up and stand up for themselves and change things for the better. And it's an inspirational speech. It's supposed to get these women to continue to pushing forward and making changes and not being satisfied with these little changes, to keep going to the next change and the next thing to make things better. For women specifically. So that's how there's actually two figurative languages right in a row, juxtaposed in the same sentence, that really hit that point. And it is inspiring. And it pairs with, in that piece, how she's talking about women in all these other countries who are more disadvantaged than these women that are graduating from this private women's college in the United States. So women of privilege, hello. So compares it and brings up all these examples of women fighting for their rights in all these countries across the world. And that was before the glass ceiling metaphor, if I remember right. So those work in conjunction together to really inspire these women to not settle. And then at the very beginning of the piece, there's all these examples she gives about what the US government has been doing when she was Secretary of State for President Clinton. She brings up one example after another in the paragraphs of, here's what we did. We could have stopped there, but instead we're doing this. This happened. We could have just been happy with that, but we did this. And she does this whole repetitive structure of what they did, how they could have just been happy with that, but how they pushed forward, which ties in the end to how she talks about perseverance and repeats this idea of perseverance at the end. I mean, for that piece, I can just go with repetition and figurative language and her examples, her exemplification, really, examples from across the world and throughout her political experience that really support this idea of not settling for good enough and to keep pushing for change and persevering against all odds. So that's how I would kind of incorporate several of them. So don't overthink it. And I picked those based off of what stood out in the piece and what I noticed was prevalent. Um, I didn't make it too complicated. I didn't try to find some fancy term for it. So just be aware if you can get these basics, the basic terms, then you're going to be fine. I'm going to find the email I sent out to make sure I don't miss any of the ones that I brought up with those couple of students I was emailing back. Sorry, that's my reminder about my meeting I have here in 15 minutes. So my message for today is to keep it simple, to use these ones that are like the key. I think they're just like the most basic things we do with writing. You're going to notice in like anything you read. So I know we had dealt with the chunks of the text and like cause effect exemplification, and that has to do with like development of ideas and maybe some shifts. And shifts is another really good one that you guys could do, but that one's harder to pick up on. It's a shift in like what you're talking about or how you're talking about it or your style. You could talk about those shifts and why the author shifts from this to this, or they shift back and forth maybe. So that's another good one. So the other ones I would pay attention to is allusions is the last one I'll talk about. Tone comes about from all of these. So I did mention to these students about tone and how tone comes about from everything really that's done. And it's the result, just like the appeals I mentioned earlier. Okay, so I was going to talk about allusions. So allusions are references to things that are really well known. So you don't want to just say that somebody quoted some famous people or quoted somebody and you don't know who they are. You don't want to acknowledge ignorance, I guess, in your essay. Don't use that example then. If you can't explain it or don't understand it, then it's not effective. So don't do that. So allusions are references to things that are well known. Martin Luther King used this a lot. That's why I used him, because his are just so obvious. And he used a lot of biblical references. Now, unfortunately, if you don't know the Bible, you might not pick up on those references. So allusion is a tough one that is often used, but you have to know the audience. And if you don't know enough about that audience or you aren't part of that audience, it can make it really difficult. Yeah. Because it depends what culture you come from and your knowledge of the world and other cultures. I mean, if someone referenced a famous leader in Uganda, I probably wouldn't know who they're talking about and I would not get the allusion. If someone mentioned something from like a reference to something obscure in Hindu culture, I'd probably be clueless and I wouldn't get it. So that's where we have to be careful with allusions, is because depending on how well read you are, what you've learned about other cultures and other readings and religions and all that stuff, it can be tough to do allusions. So just be aware of that. But if they reference something really well known, like a really well known event, rather than calling that an allusion, just call it a reference to that. Allusions usually are not as obvious and in your face as an example. And so that's the other thing I'm noticing with it. Some kids are calling something an allusion that's really not. It's an example. And it's okay. Examples are also a technique. We pick certain examples for a reason because they're what's going to prove our point. So make sure you use the right term for that. And if all else fails, go with example. Allusion, again, is going to be more subtle. It's going to be like name dropping is what I usually call it, where someone references something that they don't explain every little bit of it. They expect you to pick up on that comparison and how this thing they're referencing relates to what they're talking about. I mean, they might explain it a little bit, but they're not going to explain the reference completely. Whereas an example, they're probably going to explain all of it. So, for example, when Martin Luther King Jr. Um, uses like quotes from the Bible in his own speech, or he uses things from the Declaration of Independence, the actual phrasing, um, or he uses at the beginning, he uses is it in the I Have a Dream speech? He uses the beginning of the Gettysburg Address that said 7 years ago, our forefathers, blah, 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 new nation. If I know that document and I know that beginning, I know he's alluding to that by mimicking the style. And I could talk about that. So that's how he uses allusion. He alludes to those pieces by actually using their language in his own piece, by borrowing that and borrowing the stylistics or the phrasings, because he knows that that will speak to some patriotism and make us think about what these founding fathers said they believed in, so he can call them out on it, and it's beautiful language too. So those are my tips for today. I know this video is a little bit long, but that's really the big questions I've been getting lately. So keep the questions coming, because it tells me what to talk about in a video, in a tutorial like this. I'm going to make sure that Canvas is updated with those resources from Garden of English, and also post this video on there so it's available to everybody. And I may email a link out to this video as well when I'm done. So if you have more questions, please let me know. And lastly, they have simplified this exam. If you are like on the fence and you're like, I don't even know if I should take the AP exam anymore or not, guess what? You only have to write one essay. Normally you have to write 3 essays and do a multiple choice. I've been preparing you guys all year for this. Rhetorical analysis is really what we've done most of the year. So I'm stoked that's what they picked. I know it can make you nervous. I know it's like, man, I don't know what piece they're going to throw at me. Keep in mind, this is a nationwide test. Everyone across the nation has the schools that are shut down and they're learning remotely at different levels. And AP is very well aware of that. They don't want to come out of this looking bad. So I don't think they're going to make it as difficult as it normally is. I think you're still going to have to bring your writing to the table, and you're going to have to show all your writing chops. But I also don't think they're going to set it up to try to make you fail or feel bad or anything. We just want to make sure you know how to do this, that you've learned how to write this type of essay, and that you can actually write at a college level, that you're thoughtful, that you can process your words. But we also know that it's a timed write. We know it's not going to be absolutely perfect. So as we go forward in the next a little bit less than a month till the exam, I'm still waiting for a word from the district as far as grading for AP, because we just got a video yesterday from the state superintendent talking about grading, but he's leaving some of that up to the district. So we'll wait to hear on that, but I'm going to continue with just those that want the practice and those that want feedback. Keep doing it. I mean, I guarantee you, if you keep practicing, you're going to get more confident. I'll keep giving you specific feedback. So look at the feedback I'm giving you, whether it's on Canvas or on AP Classroom. The AP Classroom ones, by the way, are like shorter versions. So if a whole essay is kind of overwhelming for you still, go do the ones on AP Classroom. That's why those are the very first things I assigned to you guys, because they were the smaller skill sets that you need to get you ready for the bigger ones. Now, some of the things on there, like the multiple choice questions, you might be like, why are you still assigning those, Mrs. Thomas? Because a lot of the skills in there are reading skills, and they're still rhetorical analysis skills. They're just in multiple choice format. So they're asking you questions that deal with author's choices and noticing those strategies. So that's why I still assign those, is because it's, first of all, getting you to read a bunch of different things, which is good, because it just keeping that reading skill up. And then secondly, some of the questions being applicable to what we're doing and the same skills that are being addressed. So keep up the good work. I'll keep updating grades. I usually do my big grading on Friday, where I actually go look at AP Classroom. That's when I'll go really look at the Gandhi essays. I just want them all turned in today by 2:30 so that I can maybe start looking at those tomorrow and then finish them up Friday. What else? Email me with questions so I know what tutorials to do or not do. And I will see you guys on the flip side. Bye.